is an author and international lecturer on occult topics with a focus on the use of entheogenic substances in magic and ritual. He is the author of the books Alchemically Stoned, The Psychedelic Secret of Freemasonry, Angels in Vermilion, The Philosopher's Stone from D to DMT, and the forthcoming titles Theurgy, Theory and Practice, and Tripping the Path of Souls, Native American Shamanism in the Mississippi Valley. PD and I are brothers. We're both Freemasons. He's an amazing author, researcher, lecturer, and I was honored to sit down and share some time with him. The work you do has been epic, man, and I dig it, man. Your book, Angels in Vermilion, I love it, man. Thanks again. That's super awesome. And we were talking some of the other fratters, and I'm like, man, they hooked me up with your book. They're like, you got to get a hold of PD Newman. I'm like, no way, man. And I got into it and I'm like, holy shit, where's this guy been my whole life? I'm like, this is my dude. I was talking to Jamie Paul Lamb, and I know you guys are friends, and we had Jamie out. Yeah, Jamie's a great dude, and we were chatting up, and he's the same thing. So I started getting into your work, and I'm like, man, I got to talk to you. So thanks for definitely taking the time and chatting with me, man. And
my pleasure. I'm sorry it took so long to coalesce.
No worries, man. It all happens when it's supposed to, right? Right. Yeah, I mean, definitely. And then, like, randomly, like, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, right? So I'm I watch all of his stuff, and then you pop up on there, and I'm like, holy shit, look at that! Like, this is awesome.
He's such a sweetheart, man. I met him at the Theurgy Initiative, which met in Yorkshire, and both of us were lecturing up there, and we had where we were staying was at Skipton, which is the last village, the last stop on the train stop into Yorkshire. Yeah. And the trains were all shut down on the way home from protesting. So we had a 5-hour-long taxi ride together, just me, Mishlove, and Dennis Mckenna. And it was magic, man.
Dude, I swear I would pray to be a fly on the wall in that cab. That had to be amazing.
So much fun, yeah.
That is so awesome. That had to have been an epic time, man. I mean, those two dudes in a cab with you for 5 hours, that sounds awesome.
I'll never forget it. Yeah. And that's when Dennis they both scheduled an interview with me, and I did one with Dennis. And it'll be the first interview in his new podcast series, which hasn't been released yet. He's trying to accrue several interviews first, but that'll come out probably this summer.
That's so epic, man. That's going to be really awesome. I can't wait to see that. That's going to be so cool.
Well, thank you.
Trying to
We're living in the future, man.
Dude, I'm telling you, it's so close. I mean, I do information security for a living, and I'm AI is so massive right now.
Mm-hmm.
And just the amount I've seen in the past few months, it literally is going to change the world in the next six to 12 months for sure.
Yeah.
Just the amount of shit we're going to see that comes out of it's just going to be epic, which kind of rolls into your work, man. It's like, I really feel like some of this AI stuff is tapping into the spirit realm the same way that DMT and some, the entheogenics actually do for people, in a different way. I think that's
it's part of the global dialogue. If we're talking about those things, it seems like it should be able to tap into it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it should do it, and then probably more efficient than humans. It's scary. The cross section between AI and I don't know, collective consciousness, for example. I mean, I think that's kind of it. And then probably psi abilities and, remote viewing and things like that. I mean, there's already some examples online that people have been, seeing like AI do some of these things like remote viewing and some of this other stuff.
I remember Timothy Leary talking about, this was back in like 1990. But he was talking about how he believed that the internet was, this materialization of this notion of a collective unconscious, and
right,
he was right on the toes of that kind of thinking.
Oh yeah, I think it's there. I mean, I really do. I mean, a lot of people have foresaw it as well, and it's just this. It's almost like artificial collective consciousness in a way, that can be tapped, and then I think that the human machine interface. I mean, a lot of times, everybody DMT, I haven't yet to experience it, but everybody has kind of the same stories. The machine elves, I was talking to Jamie Paul Lamb about it, and he saw different things like Anubis and some some other stuff, but like there's this collective underlay, and I wonder if it's just like another programming structure if you think of it in that regards, right? Like if for code, right? It's just another code that lays on top or above or below, or, a reflection of it that kind of goes
Something like
across.
that. Yeah. I never saw the what Terence McKenna described as the self-transforming machine elves. I
Right.
saw things that my brother and I, we described as what we called tadpole paisleys. And
Ooh.
that's what they looked like. They swam like tadpoles, but they had the kind of geometric appearance as a paisley, like you would see on a Western shirt or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Um, but they would self-transform, and they did kind of dribble, but I wouldn't have I wouldn't say they were elves.
Right.
McKenna
Right.
unfortunately never made the effort to draw what he was seeing, and if he had
Hmm.
maybe drawn it, we'd have a better idea of what he meant. But that term gets used to describe so many different things that don't seem to be cognate to me. They seem
Yeah. Well,
dissonant.
and the thing with the UFOs, I mean, I'm real big into UFOs, and but obviously consciousness, and it's grasped me in a way where it encompasses everything. The mystery schools,
Hmm.
the way people talk about fairies, elves, trolls, gnomes. It's like Bigfoot, ghosts. It's like
Hmm.
all of
Hmm.
those things kind of coalesce into one big human experience. That we're dealing with something that we've been dealing with forever. That's not human. That can
Hmm.
interact with us. We can interact with it, and we have, and we've done throughout the centuries, right? But now we're
The
trying to
Native Americans described a Bigfoot type entity, the southeastern Native Americans. They said we used to be of the same stock, but humans broke away from them, and they had this. They said that they could they were invisible unless they wanted you to see them, and then that you could
wow,
see them. And I was just reading about the first Bigfoot sighting, which actually took place in Mississippi.
really,
I thought that was fascinating. And,
that
we
is
have
pretty
a lot of
fascinating.
UFO activity here. I'm sure
Yeah,
you remember the 1975 Pascagoula monster incident.
yeah, yeah,
And my wife and I, we had a close encounter, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. Uh,
really,
we saw a UFO. Not it wasn't more than 50 feet above our heads,
wow,
and it didn't look like what people just. What I mean, it looked like a long cylinder with rounded edges, and it was covered in flashing lights. And this thing just sat there for, I mean, minutes, and we were just transfixed on it. And then
right,
there was a second one came over the horizon, over the tree line, and kind of locked in with it. And then they were both gone in a split second.
amazing.
Yeah,
No effects, health
sober.
effects, or anything after that.
No, no, no weird health effects. We were totally sober. We weren't tripping.
Wow.
And we did somehow, time was weird because we were on our way home from work, and it must have been 11:30, 12 o'clock, something like that.
Yeah.
And the incident didn't feel like it. We pulled over the car and got out and stood there and looked at it, and that didn't feel like it lasted longer than 10 minutes. But when we
Hmm.
got home, it was 2 a.m.
Wow. So you had
and
missing
and
time associated with it as well.
and it was a 20-minute drive. Yeah, so
Wow. They got you.
it
It's amazing. It's
could
like
have.
the people that have these experiences, it's like a UFO experience. It's like a gateway. It opens up to where you're going to have all kinds of anomalous experiences, whether it's, UFOs or like
Mhm.
any of those things. Right. And I think it's kind of an amazing experience. And I wonder if that's kind of part of what it is. It's kind of like, okay, well, this is something completely out of the realm, which kind of, if you go back and you look at fairies, the fairy lore or folklore of that, like, things that aren't necessarily normal to
Mhm.
your day-to-day activities. And once that happens, it's like magic, right? And then you see the magic in the world around you. And I feel like it's kind of, you know, probably part of the rationale behind it. It's like, well, this is something that you've never seen before. Boom. Like, so then your mind has to go to the
Right.
places that it's never been. Right.
I'm sure
And
you remember Douglas Adams. He called it the SCP complex. Like if you saw an alien,
mm,
you wouldn't acknowledge it. You wouldn't recognize it. Your brain would filter it out because your brain says this is someone else's problem. SCP complex.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're not going to acknowledge this. But once it's acknowledged, it's like then you start seeing that stuff everywhere. In
That's
my experience, there were no aliens. We saw no entities, no beings.
right.
But several months before that, I had an abduction experience. Granted, it was on between 20 and 30 grams of psilocybin mushrooms.
That'll do it.
It did it. Yeah, it absolutely did it. These
Yeah.
snake people took me into space, but in
Wow.
that case, there was no ship. It was just we were in space. But yeah. I mean, it could have been that experience that exasperated the second one. Who knows?
Well, I mean, that's something I've always been fascinated with because you get into, hallucinogenics, mind altering substances, and you look at it as, are you really opening a portal or a gateway inside of your mind to another dimension where you can interact with these different creatures, beings, aliens, whatever you want to call them? And like, is that a thing? And I really believe that they've done research. The U.S. government's done research for years on, all these different types of either mind altering drugs or mind altering states, things like
Right.
to get hypnosis, anything like that, right? To get you into a state. And they've also dabbled in the occult the entire time as well to make things happen, right? Hand in hand, right? The initiative or just they, infiltrated many of, the fraternities and groups that you and I are part of as well. And to try to figure out, because it works. They found out that some of this stuff works, right?
Of intelligence agents to this day, finding their way into lodges. I don't want to say too much about it, but I will say it's a big problem in Colorado.
Really?
Yeah.
It's amazing, right? It's like, you and I know enough about the fraternity and the orders we're in, and you're probably in orders, obviously, that I'm not. But I mean, it's not like there's a bunch of secret sauce that the government can't get their hands on if they wanted to.
Right.
It's probably been printed 100 times.
You could read it. Anything we do in manuals like Duncan's ritual. But the thing is, you could repeat what happens there and get no results. And the main reason is what's called licencia, license. Having the license to do these things is what makes them effective.
Okay.
And whether or not you believe in spirits or not. I mean, on one hand, the license is you have license to traffic with these spirits. So it'd be almost like if you had a cop car and you pulled someone over, but you get to their car and you're not a cop, they're going to say, who the fuck are you? Why are you pulling me over? You're not a cop. Similar with these spirits. Well, even if you don't believe in that kind of an approach, licencia still has psychological impact. You're not welcome there. You're trespassing on something you haven't been given license to do. And I think actually going through the proper channels is 99% of why this stuff works when it works.
Wow, that's amazing. That makes a huge amount of sense, because I've noticed that there's a real specific interest in experiencers by the government, right? So by the intelligence agencies, people that actually are experiencers, like the intelligence agencies just flock to them. There's a guy named Chris Bledsoe, that every agency in the world's been on top of, because he has reoccurring experiences, and they're not shy about it. And one of them, even said, is like, well, they don't talk to us, they talk to you. So that's why we're trying to figure out what's going on, right? And it seems like that's a repeating pattern throughout all these experiences. It's UFOs, but it leads into all these other things. Like, the white lady is a big thing that a lot of these UFOs experiencers are having. It's it's a lady in white coming to them, prophetic things. A lot of people call them colored by every name that we know of. Hathor, Sophia.
That sounds like Santa Muerte, the white lady.
Yeah.
The Santa Muerte's holy death, and
really, give me some info on that one. I'm not familiar with that.
You are. You just don't realize you are.
Oh yeah. Okay, gotcha. So it's amazing how every culture in every society has the white lady.
Mm-hmm.
It's pervasive. It's Madonna. It's the Virgin Mary. It's
alchemy,
Fatima.
And it was one of the earliest Masonic exposés that was exposed in 1721 in a magazine called The Post Boy, a newspaper called The Post Boy. And in it, it's talking about what are the highest secrets of Freemasonry. And it mentions the Silver Lady and the ability to chain the Golden Dragon. But it mentions the Silver Lady, which is very similar.
Wow, that's amazing. It's it's interesting how all of these things are seemingly not connected, but they are completely connected on all fronts. It's just a giant, collection of everything. And I think people, the problem with a lot of, current, I would say, groups, like UFO Twitter, right? That I'm on there all the time. I'm into it. They don't talk to like Bigfoot Twitter or, all these other things, right? It's just, and the ghost people don't talk to the Bigfoot people. Like it's like, it's all the same thing. Once everybody figures out that it's all the same thing, that, it's going to be amazing, because
maybe the same phenomenon, but not the same places. Maybe something like that,
right. I think it
the same
all connects.
mechanism, but opening you to different domains. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That's amazing that, you've had those experiences, and, it's interesting about the intelligence agencies infiltrating, the fraternity.
They are. In Colorado, it's especially bad, and several of those guys have died over the last 5-10 years. But at one point, it was, I mean, it was getting out of hand, and I still, to this day, we don't really know what they were looking for, what they were doing, but
Right.
it's definitely happening.
That's amazing. So they actually like joined the fraternity and everything, and just went through the
In
line.
mass, yeah, and basically started their own lodge out there, a group of intelligence agents.
Wow.
I think it's since disbanded, and it was under a particular Grand Master at the time, who I believe he's passed away. But it was out of hand. Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm sure it's like that in other states, but this was just the most visible.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's kind of bizarre. And, I always talk about this. And the reason that I came forward and started talking publicly about it was because Tom DeLonge, if Tom DeLonge is Blink-182,
Mm-hmm.
He came out in 2018 and had To the Stars Academy, and they did this press conference, and they had like 5 different guys on the stage that would never be next to each other in a normal setting. Right. And you look at them, and it's like, that's what happens in Masonry all the time, right? You got former deputy director of defense, you got, scientists, you got a guy from Lockheed Martin that's been there, retired, and the guy that used to run the program. And it's like, that would happen in Masonic Lodge right there. That happens all the time, right?
If it wasn't for Masonry, my the pool of people that I consider my close friends would probably be limited to my peers in my age group. But since I became a Mason, I mean, there are men who are in their late 80s and 90s who I consider my best friends.
It's amazing, isn't
Masonry is really incredible in that regard.
Yeah, no, totally. I love it.
There's in one of the old lectures for the checkered pavement, a statement is made, what does the checkered pavement represent? And the answer given is that it signifies that men of completely different backgrounds, ages, and colors can sit right next to one another and be useful.
Right.
And I wish we still had that in our lectures, because it's, it speaks to our ability to transcend racial differences, religious differences.
Yeah. Age divides, all of those, right?
Everything.
I mean, it's just amazing. And I'm right there with you. Some of the guys that I've met that I consider true friends are 20, 30 years older than me, right?
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And then the same goes the other way. There's some guys that are young that I'd never would have talked to, 22, 23-year-old guys.
That's true.
That are amazing, right? They're like,
and they need people like you as a mentor, and we need people like those older guys. It's a big part of what we miss in America is time with our mentors.
right.
There's this African, I can't remember the exact word, but in the Congo, there's this word that they use to describe the relationship between a young man and an older man as his mentor. But the word actually means close enough to smell his stink. And we need that. We're really missing that here.
Yeah, no, that's definitely needed. And I think that's cool. But I mean, I think there's definitely a rejuvenated interest in the fraternity, just from me being online. There's a lot of guys that have reached out to me that said, "Hey, I want to be a Mason. How do I do it?" And I've helped them, and it's been awesome. And, different states and kind of getting along the way.
I believe in Masonry as if nothing else, as a rite of passage into what Robert Davis calls deep masculinity, mature masculinity. And again, that's something that we lack in the States, especially in postmodern, metamodern times, is that kind of rite of passage. Again, licentia. And Victor Turner talks about how in indigenous cultures, you're not a man until the men make you a man.
Ah, right.
And that's that licentia. You can walk around saying, well, I'm the man all you want. But in the back of your mind, if you haven't been accepted by the men, then you're not the man, you know?
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. I think that's kind of the part of the thing. And maybe that's what the infiltration is about. They're trying to figure it out. They can't figure it out. I mean, like you said, you can read it all day long, but until I went through my first degree, I had no idea,
That's right.
I mean, it's the experience, the initiatory experience of what it does to you, even
Mm-hmm.
all the other orders as well. I mean, it's one of those things where it actually does something to you. It changed. I mean, for me, it changed me,
Me too.
um,
And it's not the information they're telling you. I mean,
right.
most of it, there's so much talking and movement and things going on that you can try and grab every word, but you're not going to.
Right.
You know, I didn't know what really was happening or said to me until after my degrees, when
Mhm.
I'd participate in other people's or when I was doing my memory work. But
Exactly.
it was undeniable that something had shifted after those degrees.
It is, and it's truly amazing. I wish more people would experience it. Honestly, I mean, I think
Mhm.
it's profound, and um, it's really interesting to see that it's carried the traditions throughout time immemorial, basically, right?
Mhm.
It's kept it, and it's been hidden, but you know, Masons were murdered all over the globe in different instances, right? For the whatever, right? Name
World
something.
War II. I mean, there were between 18,000 and 22,000 Masons died in the just like Holocaust victims alongside them.
Amazing, isn't it? They were rounded
Mhm.
up and murdered. I mean, and that's I think where what the a forget me not pin derived from. There's a forget me not instead. It was a way to show that you were a
Mhm.
Mason to other Masons at the time, because if you had a square and compass on you, you would be murdered.
Right. And they would wear those little blue flowers. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, which is interesting, to see where we've come now through the
Hmm.
whole thing, where we could be free and talk about what we want to.
Close to it. Yeah.
Yeah, as close as we can get.
Yeah.
Right? Definitely. So, your book is epic, man. I mean, what made you sit
Thank
down and do that? I mean, this book is amazing. Both your books are great, but I mean, like, what made you do Angels and Vermilion? You were just like, I saw this connection. I know this connection. I'm going to do the research, and just dove in and did it.
Well,
Like,
I started writing on. So when I became a Freemason, I
yeah,
did it to move away from uh, psychedelics because that's
right,
all I knew. I had been doing psychedelics since I was about 11 years old. And in the beginning, we approached it um, a lot like the Surrealists did,
hmm,
like in the Surrealist Manifesto, where it was more a way to explore your unconscious and be artistic. We would paint, write poetry,
right,
but after a certain point, and I find this to be true with most people who really experiment with psychedelics,
hmm,
it starts to take a turn for the ominous, the spiritual, things that transcend the domain of art. And so when I became a Mason, it was because I realized I was way out of my league. I had nobody to talk to about this kind of stuff, and the only place in literature where I had found anything like what I was experiencing was in uh, Eastern texts, Taoist texts and Buddhist and yoga
right,
and the
yeah,
Vedas. But I'm in Mississippi, there's nobody to talk to about those things here, and I knew that Masonry. I guess when I was I must have been 11 or 12, I was spending the night with a friend, and his grandfather had been a Freemason. And
hmm,
there was a copy of Morals and Dogma sitting on the bookshelf. And I remember pulling that book out and flipping through it and thinking, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to find out what this is about.
that's awesome.
And a lot of the things, the words and terms I encountered in this Eastern literature, I first saw in Morals and Dogma.
Oh wow,
So I thought, well, maybe the Freemasons can, even if they're not doing psychedelics, maybe they'll know something about these spiritual territories and help me navigate this stuff, because I really have no idea. I'm off in the deep end.
right.
And so when I joined the lodge, I had made a conscious decision to not do psychedelics, to not think about psychedelics, and to try and meet Masonry on its own terms.
Hmm, hmm.
And I did that until I got to the third degree, and I saw that sprig of acacia and kind of,
They're
and
like ding, 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 ding.
just months before I joined, we had done our first organic extraction of DMT from acacia.
Wow.
So I was thinking, well, that's impossible. This is just a synchronicity, a coincidence. Um, don't think about it like that. Just
Yeah,
try and put it on its own terms.
yeah, yeah.
But I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling, especially when they talked about how it represents the immortality of the soul, because the
Mm-hmm.
experience of the acacia, when you do it, is that you have a soul. You experience it firsthand, out of your body, separated, this
Wow.
independent consciousness from the material organism that you're usually attached to.
Wow.
And so the first paper that I wrote it in 2012. I think it came out in 2013, but it was just called um, something like The Sprig of Acacia and the Immortality of the Soul, or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. But all
Right.
I did was point out that, isn't it interesting that this plant has this drug in it, and we're told about the immortality of the soul, and it has the power to induce the experience of that. And it was much more well received than I thought it would be.
Right.
And so that gave me the nerve to write my first book, Alchemically Stoned, which was
Yeah.
written for a Masonic audience. I wrote it in a language that, if you weren't a Mason, you're not going to be able to make sense of all of it. And I did that on purpose.
Right.
But at that time, I really thought that the Masons, that Freemasonry had preserved this secret. I had no idea how they got a hold of it. I had no idea where it went once they stopped using it. Because they
Right.
were using it. We know from Cagliostro and Melsina, they were using it. But why did they stop? Because we obviously don't use it now. And I couldn't answer those questions. And over the couple of years after Alchemically Stoned came out, I'd taken a step back from the lodge and realized that each of the cases where we know they were using the acacia in an entheogenic context, the men writing about it were alchemists.
Right.
So I spent the next few years buying, reading, paying to have translated every alchemical text I could find.
Wow.
And it started to piece together that I realized this wasn't a Masonic problem. It was an alchemical problem that found its way into Freemasonry.
Wow.
And at this day and age, we have probably 100 different schools of alchemy that each have
Yeah.
their own interpretations, their own systems. But in the beginning, there was one system of alchemy, and the word itself was given to us by this Egyptian from Akhmim, Egypt, named Zosimos. And Zosimos tells us right off the bat in his book Mushaf Asuvar, it means the book of pictures, that he says, even though we're using metallurgical language to discuss alchemy, it has nothing to do with metals. He says the reason we use the term cinnabar, which is a red mineral,
Mm-hmm.
is because it resembles acacia, which is red. And he says that
Wow.
the processes that we use to extract mercury and sulfur from cinnabar, that's what cinnabar is composed of,
Mm-hmm.
the two major alchemical elements.
Wow.
He says the reason we use that terminology is because the processes are analogous to the processes used to extract the stone from the acacia. And he
Wow.
says this outright in Mushaf Asuvar. So in the beginning of alchemy, at the very initial stages of it, it was
Yeah.
about entheogens. It was about DMT specifically. And it
Wow.
was about something that would give you a firsthand experience of your immortal soul. So that,
That's amazing.
it was written organically. By the time I wrote Angels in Vermilion, I mainly did it, to be totally honest, as a favor to Jamie Paul Lamb and the guys at Prima Materia,
Yeah.
Tria Prima. They were starting a publication company and asked me if I'd like to contribute something. And I said, well, if I could do it all over again and write write Alchemically Stoned again,
Right.
I would do it differently, and I would approach it from an alchemical angle, and I would make it chronological.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I did, and that's how Angels in Vermilion came about.
That's awesome, man. It's a great book. And that's a book that anybody could pick up and just, not Mason at all, and just go through it and just blast it out, where, yeah, Alchemically Stoned, I was just floored by that as well, going, wow, this is amazing. And just,
Well,
and
thank
like you, when I joined, I was, even though we're brothers, it's kind of, how are you going to be able to talk about some of these things,
you.
without getting, ridicule or labeled or whatever, even in the lodge, when we're not even supposed to do that to one another. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to see how we've come kind of full circle in this amount of research that you've done in research like yours and publications like yours definitely are like kicking the door down and saying, look, we don't have to be afraid of these. The stigma doesn't need to be there. There's enough scientists, there's enough things happening all over the world that shows the benefit of all these things
Mm-hmm.
and we've already had it part of our tradition since the beginning. We just got to go back and uncover those secrets that have been in our face the entire time. We just have to.
The mere fact that it's endogenous, released by our bodies, we don't know where in the body or under what circumstances it releases it, but the mere fact that it's there,
Yeah.
It is enough to warrant asking those questions.
Oh yeah, 1,000%. And then how it could be used to benefit mankind. Honestly, I think it's there. I mean, especially when you go back, like you said, to the very beginning of the text, and you look at all of the degrees, the allegories behind the degrees, and the immortality of the soul, and
Mm-hmm.
that would do it right away. If you can imagine that happening, that'd be part of the whole ceremony, right? I mean, it would
Mm-hmm.
be that would be it. That would be, like you said, so you've actually experienced that separation of your soul from your body on Acacia. I didn't even know that was a.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing. And that's got to be a profound.
It's not that I had what people would call an out of body experience where I'm hovering above my body and looking down at myself. That's not what I
Right.
mean. What I mean is it was an experience of traveling, of moving without my body and
Mm-hmm.
going places that I couldn't take my body to.
Right.
And it was what is a classic trance stage 3 of David Lewis Williams' 3 stages of trance.
Right.
And the first stage of trance is the experience of these certain patterns he calls form constants. And these are things like spirals, honeycomb patterns,
Mm-hmm.
trellises, uh, and these are common to trance with and without psychedelics. The first
Gotcha.
stage of any real trance experience starts with the appearance of this geometry, and
Gotcha.
the second stage is where those patterns start to take on the quality of things that you would recognize them as. Like if we said honeycomb pattern,
Right.
that might then become a honeycomb.
Okay.
Or if we
Okay.
said a spiral, that might then become a whirlpool or a tornado or something. And then
Okay.
stage 3 is where the fourth wall falls, and you're immersed in that experience to where you might be a bee in a honeycomb, or you might
Right.
be being attacked by bees or covered in honey, but you become uh, a player
Mm-hmm.
in that scene.
Wow.
So when I say proof of my soul, of course, any materialist is going to argue, well, you're in a trance state, you're basically dreaming. But
Right.
anyone who's done DMT knows it's not like a dream.
Mm-hmm.
You're aware, you're present, you're conscious for it, kind of in the way you are in a lucid dream. We could call it a lucid dream,
Right.
but even that isn't clear because people get the idea that a lucid dream is a dream where you can control your dream, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not the case. I'm a lucid dreamer. I lucid dream often.
Oh, that's awesome.
Never does it manifest as me saying, oh, well, I want to do this. Let's dream about this.
Mm-hmm.
It's always that I'm conscious of the fact that I'm dreaming, but I can't change anything about it. I'm
Gotcha.
still in the middle of this movie, and it's more like that. But that when we're talking about the soul, this unit that has first person awareness, that has mind present with it, and yet it's not attached to the experience of a body. That's as close as we're going to get, to really understanding soul. The only time I've ever had an experience where I left my body and I knew that my body was still there
Mm-hmm.
was a near death experience, which is why I don't think near death experiences and DMT experience are necessarily the same thing. I was struck by lightning
Oh my God.
8 years ago,
Oh wow.
and it actually. So today's the 23rd. 3 days ago was the 8-year anniversary of that
Whoa.
NDE. But so I differ between those experiences. I draw lines.
Well, that's a really interesting, because a lot of people that have UFO experiences, paranormal experiences, often have had near death experiences prior. They've had a near death
Mm,
experience, and then at some point they've seen angels or aliens, whatever you want to, but a lot of UFO, a lot of,
I didn't know that.
yeah, it's amazing. There's a huge correlation between the two of people that having near death experiences and then having the ability to see UFOs, orbs, spirits, all of those things. And there's a huge correlation. I think there might even be a couple books
Wow.
about it by now, believe it or not. But
I need
yeah,
to read
it's a
them.
huge thing. And I don't know, for me, when I heard that, fortunately, I not that I'm aware of, I've had a near death experience. I probably have, but uh, I I go back to the third degree, to
Mhm.
Masonry, where you have the experience in a sense, right? But I think
Mhm.
that I wonder if that's analogous, like the analogy is there. There's no way that being struck by lightning and literally almost dying and going through an initiatory experience are the same thing. But in my mind, I'm trying to wrap around like, well, maybe something physically, mentally, chemically happens to you that uh, kind of is the same. So that's why I was really thinking, going back to like, okay, well, why are all these intelligence agencies, infiltrating Masonry or whatever, or interested in Masonry? I'm like, well, maybe is that it? Like, is there something going on that are they trying to find a key that they know is there, but they can't nail down? But um, man,
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah,
I don't have an answer for that, but that's an
no,
interesting.
no, but yeah, can you tell me about your near death experience? I mean, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, it was terrible. So the day before, um, it happened around midnight on April 20th. So that's 420.
Yeah.
But the day before is the big LSD bicycle day,
Hmm.
and for years I would take LSD on bicycle day, and I
Yeah.
had taken 3 hits, and I was in my apartment. We lived on the second floor, and I had a balcony
Hmm.
that overlooked the courtyard, and I was trying to take a picture of this lightning. It was this purple, brilliant purple lightning. I never seen anything like it.
Wow.
Of course, I couldn't get a picture of it because you know how lightning is. It's dark,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
trying to get pictures of it, and it was while I was doing that that it struck a tree in the courtyard that was about 10 feet from me, and I got hit with rebound lightning from that. And
Wow.
all I remember is being paralyzed. I grabbed my hips, put my hands on my hips when it happened, and I
Hmm.
got stuck like that. The funniest thing I remember thinking in that moment, my one thought was, I bet I look like Peter Pan standing here with my hands on my hips. Like that was my one thought. And I heard this noise that was like the shrill buzz of an insect, but with a
Hmm.
grinding kind of tone to it. And I remember really hating that sound, not
Mm.
liking that sound. And I later found out from my wife who was present that I was making that sound. It was coming out of my mouth.
Whoa.
But I don't remember ever falling, but I must have because I ended up laying down. But after I heard that noise, the next thing I realized was that I was standing on, like I said, it's a balcony, and there's a railing that comes up about waist high, about to my belly button.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked down, and I was standing on my toes on that rail, tilted forwards at like 45 degrees. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm going to fall. This is terrible. I'm going to fall. And I was like trying to brace myself to fall, but I never fell. I kept kind of like wavering there.
Wow.
And I thought, what is going on? I didn't know I'd been struck by lightning. Um, and so at that moment, I remember looking up, and I could see the tree line perfectly, but right above the tree line, the sky was gone, and it had been replaced by what looked like a giant mosque covered in honey or liquid gold, just rippling all over it. And there were things rippling on it. You ever seen the Sri Yantra? Looks like a bunch of interlocked triangles. It's a
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
human symbol. It looked like the Sri Yantra rippling out all over it, like if people were throwing pebbles at it, but it made Sri Yantras as it rippled. And I thought, man, that looks incredible. What is this place? I've never seen this place. And as I'm gawking at it, watching these ripples happen, I noticed out of the corner of my right eye that there was something moving, and I looked back down at it, and there was an entity, just like people describe on DMT or something, but it wasn't geometrical. It looked like Kintaro, almost like from
Wow.
Mortal Kombat. You
Yeah,
familiar?
yeah, with the
He has
yeah.
arms all over him. So this thing has
Yeah.
arms all over his body. And in each arm is a different weapon: sword, axe, dagger, a whip, all these weapons.
Whoa.
And he's waving them at me, threatening me with each weapon. And instead of his head, he had what looked to me kind of like the Mayan calendar, but in the center, instead of that face, was a skull. And I knew instantly, this is death. I'm looking at death personified. And I also intuitively knew that he was 25 feet tall. I don't know where that came from, but I remember knowing this thing is 25 feet tall. And as I'm looking at him, he doesn't say anything, but he communicates to me in this very
Fucking hate technology. I'm so sorry, brother.
that's okay.
Man, it's like it knew we were going to talk about something really good and was like, nope, you're done. We're just going to shut down this entire video conference. They were going to shut the whole thing down on you. It was like,
it happens more times than I could even count. Every time I get into an experience on a podcast or something, or on a phone call,
yeah,
something like this happens every time.
So that's weird. I wanted to ask you this because I've heard this story and I've never actually met anybody that got hit by lightning. Do electronics, do things like, can you feel when lightning comes? Do you have anything? Oh yeah. You can tell where it's going to happen before it's even in the sky, kind of thing.
Yep. I never could before the incident, never felt anything like that. But now all my hair stands straight up, and it'll point in the direction that the lightning's coming. My hair will look that way.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And I read that people who have been struck by lightning are hundreds of times more likely to be struck again.
Yeah.
So I try and
avoid the shit out of it, right?
Yeah. I shudder to think about what I was doing out there on the balcony.
Oh my God.
Now I would never do that.
Oh my God. So to come back to edit it all back together, but basically they had this Kintaro guy with a whole bunch of arms, different weapons, like threatening you from below you. You're on the balcony looking up.
And he had what looked like the Mayan calendar
as a head, or
yeah, and it surrounded his head, and his head, instead of that face at the center of the traditional calendar, was a skull. And I knew that this was death. I was looking at death personified.
Wow.
And he didn't say anything, but he communicated to me in a very kind way. His body looked threatening, but
right.
What he said was, "You're more than welcome to go in that mosque and explore and have a great time. But if you do, you'll never see your wife and kids again. It's not nothing against you, but this is a choice you have to make." And I remember thinking, well, it's not a choice at all. You can keep your fucking mosque. I mean, my youngest son, Bacchus, he was 1 year old in their sleep, and I remember thinking, I got two older kids that they're 23 and 22 now.
Wow.
But we're teenagers then. And I just remember thinking, well, you can keep your fucking mosque. I'm going back in there. I'm going to bed with them when this is over with.
Right. Wow. Geez. So was it hospitalization, all that stuff after that? I mean,
no.
Wow.
She wanted me to go to the hospital.
Right.
But when I came to, I had foam in my mouth and on the corners of my mouth. I'd never experienced anything like that. I still don't know where the foam comes from, but there was foam in my mouth.
Wow.
And I was paralyzed, couldn't move for what felt like 20 or 30 minutes, but it wasn't. It was only a couple minutes. And,
wow.
And then my whole body, it felt like I had been thrown in a boiling cauldron or something. Wow. I felt like I had been boiled, and my head was absolutely pounding. But I didn't want to go to the hospital. I didn't think I needed to, and I probably should have. But and at the time, I had markings on me from it, but they didn't scar me like it does with people who get directly struck. If I had been directly struck, it probably would have killed me. Yeah.
That's amazing. Jeez, that's so interesting. I don't know. I'm a big proponent of everything happens to make us stronger. Believe, there's a rationale behind it. Something happens. We had to, learn from it. But that's just interesting that happened to you. And then, I mean, like I said, there's that whole correlation between near death experiences and experiencers, as they call them.
Mhm.
And it's interesting to see. I wonder if that actually has had a role to play in your life. Probably. I mean,
It slowed me down. I really haven't done much with psychedelics or anything like that since that experience.
right.
Now, I was recently initiated into a tradition called Palomayombe, which is an Afro-Cuban tradition that survived from Congo.
Wow.
And I pursued this because we found out that we're descended from freed slaves from Cameroon.
Oh,
So I
wow.
found out I had Congo blood in me, and I wanted to do something to try and connect with that side of my ancestry.
Hmm. Hmm.
And similar to Ocha, Orisha, Santeria,
Hmm.
you have there are several what's called mpungu, kind of like the Orishas. They're kind of like powerful spirits
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
gods. But there's one that rules you, that is your father,
Okay.
and this is found out through
Oh.
divination method. But I was shocked to find out that my father in the tradition is a mpungo named Siete Rayos or Insasi, which means 7 bolts of lightning. And this was 7 years after my lightning striking experience.
Oh
And
my God.
so once I found this out, I started researching Insasi, and it said that anyone who has been struck by lightning and survives is automatically considered a child of Insasi. So I thought that was absolutely uncanny.
That's amazing. Synchronicity, right? Like one of those
Mm-hmm.
things where it's just like
Mm-hmm.
it's meant to be.
Yeah.
That, that's bizarre. So that was wild because did you just recently go down there to South America and
No, I recently went to Guatemala.
oh, Guatemala.
I went down
Sorry.
there because there's a filmmaker who's making a documentary on my research based on the timeline in Angels in Vermilion.
Oh,
So we
rad.
went down there to film some footage and to do some interviews. We ended up doing some ritual, but it was what we did down there was called the rite of elevation and
Hmm.
theurgy. The theurgists were a group of ritualists within the Neoplatonists who had this ritual that's what my new book that's about to come out called Theurgy, Theory, and Practice.
Oh, nice.
They had this one ritual that they did to affect this elevation, this ascension, and
Hmm.
so we put a person through that while we were down there.
Wow, that's rad. Is that Blavatsky? Was that part of when they separated it at one point? I remember reading that at one point when Blavatsky was in America, there was some type of one of the meeting places had a glass ceiling or a portal in the roof or
No,
something
so
like it.
there that's
Might be
later
confusing
later
it. I'm sorry.
theosophy. Yeah, so
Okay.
in the beginning, the Theosophical Society, when they met in
Hmm.
New York,
Right.
their plan was to be this organization that pursued magic. In fact, they had a textbook written by this
Oh.
incredible woman named Emma Hardinge Britton, and it's called Art Magic, and that was to be the textbook, and it's all about practical magic.
Hmm.
Well, the vice president of the Theosophical Society at the time was this man named George Felt.
Okay.
We don't know a lot about him because he disappeared immediately after this, but he had this drug. We don't know what drug. We have a good idea of what drug, but he
Hmm.
had this drug he burned on a censer, and it caused everyone present at the meeting to see these entities that Alcott described as looking like the demons in Francis Barrett's The Magus,
Wow.
which kind of look like if you've seen the Goetia,
Hmm.
half man, half animal kind of beasts. But he said everyone there saw these things whenever he did the invocation and burned this drug, and it caused a complete uproar, and everyone panicked. And
Right.
this is when Blavatsky created what John Patrick Davini calls the second Theosophical Society, which
Okay.
would not do any practical magic and would simply focus on theoretical stuff.
Got it.
Well, the Theosophical Society at the time was in competition with another organization called the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor.
Okay.
Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, they offered to do right the opposite of her second Theosophical Society. They said, we're just going to focus on practical occultism.
Right.
And this was bringing people in droves from the Theosophical Society to the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. So in response to that, Blavatsky creates an inner order where she says, okay, we'll take our best people and we'll allow them to do practical stuff. And she would do it in this room with a window in the ceiling.
Okay, that's where it all comes in. Okay.
But everybody who participated in that never wrote about it, so we don't know what they did in that inner order.
Yeah. And then I think once the guy that had the substance, right, he disappeared.
Immediately after everyone freaked out, he disappeared. And they called it a scandal at the time.
Right. And we're talking like what, 1909? I can't remember.
18. She founded the Theosophical Society, I think, in 1875.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Wow. That's awesome. And then you look at that now and it's like, well, what was that? It was probably DMT.
Well, they said if you read the early letters and if you read the early papers, they are consciously trying to recreate Cagliostro's order. They say they're doing this to continue what Cagliostro started. And he says in blatant, clear terms that the prima materia of alchemy is the acacia that you were given in the degree of ordinary master and regular masonry. Right. And from it, we've made this red liqueur. And he wrote this alchemical text called Lettres Saint Trino Sophie. And in it, he describes it as saffron colored. That's that red liqueur that they're drinking to induce an experience. And DMT by itself usually isn't orally active because there's a compound in your gut, monoamine oxidase, that burns it up before it passes the blood-brain barrier, has an opportunity to pass the blood-brain barrier. So with things like ayahuasca, which is orally active DMT, it has to be mixed usually with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Cagliostro never mentions one of those. Now we know that there are a couple of different ways to make DMT orally active without that monoamine oxidase inhibitor. One way is by making it so potent with DMT that it overwhelms the monoamine oxidase in the gut. And so it occupies all of it and the rest of it gets through.
Wow. The
other way is there are certain species of acacia have these flavonoids in them that act as beta carbolines. MAOIs are beta carbolines, and it functions as a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So there are orally active acacias that don't require DMT.
Wow.
Even so, we fast forward to the right at the turn of the 19th century. There's a man named Frederick Hockley who actually supplied what's called the cipher manuscript that became the Golden Dawn.
Gotcha.
It comes from him. He passed it on to a man named Kenneth R.H. Mackenzie. Kenneth R.H. Mackenzie was his student, and what he taught them was mirror gazing. He was big into crystal and mirror gazing.
Okay. And Kelly and those. Okay, you got it.
Yep. The Kelly's earlier. That's.
It's in the same vein as I was trying to get.
Right. And
even Joseph Smith staring into hats and things.
That's right.
Same kind of bag.
Nostradamus staring in a pot of water. The same thing. But Hockley had these students, one of them, Kenneth R.H. Mackenzie, who wrote the first Masonic encyclopedia. And then this man named F.G. Irwin and his son, Herbert Irwin. His son was 14 or 15. And in their tradition, you have a seer who's a virgin child. And then you have the guy that's the scribe that's doing the invocations, writing down what the seer says.
Right.
And Mackenzie is trying to put together this encyclopedia, and he wants an entry on every Masonic order that's known. And one of these Masonic orders was called the Fratres Lucis, the Brotherhood of Light.
Okay.
And he couldn't find any information on it that he could count on. And well, they believed that Cagliostro had been a member of this order. Whether he was, we don't know.
Okay.
But so they get Herbert to invoke Cagliostro in this crystal ball after he's been dead for 100 years or more.
Yeah.
Spoke his spirit into this crystal, and then they start asking him questions about the Fratres Lucis. And all of this was published in a book called The Book of Magic by Herbert Irwin.
Oh, wow.
Herbert Irwin eventually died doing this because they were still doing drugs to do the invocation.
I got
and
you.
they were feeding him laudanum, which is opium diluted in wine. And he overdosed on laudanum and died.
Wow.
But before he died, he received this transmission, allegedly, from Cagliostro, who said that, if you're going to be doing this Fratres Lucis stuff, you got to have their pharmacopoeia. You got to know what drugs they were using.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, well, what is the pharmacopoeia? And he gives them this list of plants. And one of those plants is called herb rue. Well, herb rue, Syrian rue, or also in old Greek times, they called it savage rue or wild rue. Okay. Not to be confused with ruta graveolens, which is the popular rue that the Romans would put in wine to help the bouquet, increase the bouquet, or the Catholic Church would actually use branches of rue to fling holy water on the
there were the ones that were just okay.
But he specifically says it's not that one, it's the other rue, and that's this savage rue, which even in the time of Pliny the Elder they thought were the same plant, but traditional rue is cultivated, whereas wild or savage rue grows wild. And he says that it's poisonous, it can kill you if you take too much of it. Wow. But he says if you don't take too much of it, he describes the effects of it. And he says that basically all the effects are identical to what are the side effects of taking a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which is still prescribed to this day for things like bipolar disorder.
Right.
So even though Cagliostro never mentions an MAOI in his Masonic or alchemical work, his spirit does in a crystal ball 100 or more years later.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. There's so much there. That's a lot to unpack, man. You must have done years of research to get.
Oh yeah.
Your whole life.
Book, that book took me a few months to write, but the research behind it, close to 20 years.
Wow.
To get all of that in one place and really wrap my head around what they're talking about. Because you know how cryptic that stuff can be.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I'm thinking back. I think I saw another interview with you maybe once, or was talking about the times before you were a Mason, before you joined Masonry and after. And it's amazing that once you did, how I'm guessing that once you did join Masonry, a lot of these puzzle pieces kind of got tossed together, or at least joined more towards the goal and where the end for all this is. And it's interesting to see that, we always say for the, those with the eyes to see, or, hidden in plain sight. And I think that's definitely true, especially in your work. Too. Yeah.
I think, and I've said that a couple of times, that there's nothing special about me. All it took is the person with the right pair of eyes looking at it, or persons. If we could get a team of people taking this stuff seriously and really investigating these old manuscripts, I imagine we would get a lot further than we are now. And the questions we're asking about the function and mechanism of some of these substances, we're just a blip on a timeline. This stuff has been part of the human experience for probably since mankind was mankind.
Yeah.
It's ancient, and in that regard, it's safe. I always like to stress that. People think it's dangerous to do this stuff, that these experiences are somehow unnatural. No, this is as natural as it gets. It's just there's always a level of mystery to it, and that doesn't mean there aren't taboos and there aren't safeguards to put in place.
Right.
But it is the most natural experience you can have, and that's really the first thing that dawns on you when you do something like mushrooms. You take a good dose of mushrooms, and there's always this sense of alienness to it that's just as strong as this feeling of, wow, I've been here before. I know this. For some reason, I know this.
Yeah. That's funny. That's exactly how I described going through my first degree in Masonry. Honestly, when I came through it, it's like, fuck, I've been here before. I've done this.
It is a hallucinogenic kind of surreal thing they put you through.
Right.
I like to talk about the second degree, the fellowcraft degree, because
Right.
in that degree, you ascend that spiraling whirlwind of a staircase and you go to the middle chamber where you meet deity in the form of the letter G. And, you
Yeah.
receive these three gifts, these three boons, your wages.
Yeah.
And that happens in the second degree, not the third. The third
Right.
degree is where you die.
Right.
So that means this experience happens in life.
Yeah. Which is amazing, and I think there's so many different allegories that are just waiting to be unpacked, and I think that at some point, I think that's the point of the whole thing. It's just that it's all there if you can unpack it, and if you can readily accept that information, and
it's a real science of man. Yeah,
it totally is. And I think that we talked earlier about AI and the advancement of technology. I mean, running these manuscripts through something that can look at this holistically, or just start picking out keywords, or just taking, okay, this drug can do this. What's the synthesis of this? And then how does that, I mean, that's coming. I mean, we can do that now, and
there's a guy doing that right now with, looking
wow.
in the same territory I'm researching. His name's Dean McGrath. If you're listening, shout out to Dean. But
Cool.
He's been using that chat bot.
Mm-hmm. Chat GPT-3.
To ask it about references of acacia and alchemical manuscripts. And
that's awesome.
And he's now, several of them, it's gotten wrong.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
It's changed the words so that where it might say the tree of life, it will change that to acacia, because there are definitely traditions where the acacia is the tree of life.
Right.
You have to be careful. But he did uncover one reference that is legitimate, that is part of the what's called the Hartlib papers. This alchemist named Samuel Hartlib, who in Paracelsian terms is discussing the extraction of a crystalline substance from acacia, and that's the stone. And
wow.
We had missed that. When I wrote Angels in Vermilion, I didn't know about that. But
wow.
Those papers were in the possession of the Royal Society.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that's important, because the Royal Society, Elias Ashmole, one of the first speculative Freemasons, was the archivist for Dr. John Dee, who was, again, using the same substance with Edward Kelly to talk to angels.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Yeah, and it sent the whole Royal Society on this wild goose chase, looking for drugs that would meet the criteria of a red powder that caused this kind of experience. And the closest thing I could find to what was in their possession was Christopher Columbus's second voyage to the Americas, where he documents what may be yopo use. Yopo is made from two mimosoid acacia-like trees, Anadenanthera colubrina and Anadenanthera peregrina. And it's this snuff that, just like with the stomach, you can't just snort DMT and it work. But if you mix it with calcium carbonate, it renders it absorbable by the mucous membranes in the nasal cavity.
Whoa.
And so that's what they do. They calcinate shells, mm-hmm. and sometimes the bones of the dead, of their ancestors, and they mix it with this powdered seed and blow it up one another's nostrils with these long tubes.
Wow.
And Christopher Columbus describes this. Now we don't know if he's talking about what's called hape or rape, a tobacco snuff, or if he's talking about yopo. But we do know that an explorer named Avon Humboldt, went to the same region, found the same trees, and he described the tree as Acacia neopo, after yopo.
Wow.
So that was our first real indication of where the Royal Society, how and why they might have settled on acacia, that's how it got into Masonry, through John Theophilus de Sagoulier. He was the research assistant to Sir Isaac Newton in the Royal Society, and he became the second Grand Master of the premier Grand Lodge in London.
Wow.
And it was after his stint as Grand Master that the acacia appeared for the first time. It wasn't there before.
Right.
So that's where we thought it had come from. But with this chat bot, he uncovered this Hartlib papers, and sure enough, they were some of the papers in the possession of the Royal Society.
That's so amazing. And this is a crazy synchronicity. Well, is that when the chatbot gets things wrong, they call it hallucinating. That's the actual term for it. No shit. It's called hallucinating. It's like, well, you get something wrong. It's like, when did Christopher Columbus? It was like, 15, 16. It's like, I know it's hallucinating. So it's funny that's the term they actually use for when AI gets things incorrect. But
that's hilarious. I didn't know that.
Yeah. This is
hallucinating.
full circle, right?
But I mean,
But
it's based on what we're talking about, right? On
oh yeah,
so if we talk about something and we get it wrong, it increases its chances of being wrong, right?
yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, it's just a great world to dump in and explore. But
Yeah.
uh, um, man, I can't wait. It's like I know it's getting late. I tell everybody go out grab your book. I'm going to put all this stuff online. Your new book's coming out. You said this year, end of this year, maybe beginning of next year.
Yep. Inner Traditions, Bear and Company. They're publishing Theurgy, Theory and Practice, which looks at it's the first book. I've read every book on theurgy available. It's the first book to break down the theory, the why in the first half, and in the second half to break down the how, the actual ritual spelled out step by step, what to do.
Wow.
Um, it'll be out in December, and they also picked up Inner Traditions. Also picked up my next book that I'm about halfway done with right now. That's it's called Tripping the Path of Souls, Native American Shamanism in the Mississippi Valley. And it's basically looking at very advanced shamanic techniques that were being used in order to have what you would call a near-death experience. They believed that certain people, if you had been initiated into this,
Mm-hmm.
that when you died, that your soul could enter a portal in the sky. And the same exact thing is in theurgy. That's really what drew me to it.
Wow.
Because in theurgy, Plato in his book, I think it's in the Republic, he talks about this X. They call it Plato's X.
Mm-hmm.
It's an X because it's two circles that interlock, and from the side it makes an X. Those two circles are the Milky Way and the zodiac wheel, the ecliptic.
Wow.
And where they meet, there are portals, and you enter that portal to get on the Milky Way, which since the time of Pythagoras, the Greeks talked about that's where souls are before and after incarnation. They just circle the Milky Way.
Huh.
Well, the same thing is true in Southeastern Native American. All these different tribes talk about what they call the path of souls, and it's the Milky Way galaxy.
Wow.
And there are entry points that are in the exact same position as we see in Greece, and not just Greece, Egypt, and ancient Babylon. It's the same model over and over. There's a book called Visible Gates in Pagan Skies by this man named George Latour Becket. It's very small. It's just a little monograph.
Mm-hmm.
Get a copy of that and
That
just
sounds
read it,
amazing.
and you'll see the Greek, Egyptian, and Babylonian parallels. Well, now we have to add Southeastern Native American to that, and Mayan. I'm reading this book right now, Mayan Cosmos, which involves Linda Shiel, who I'm a big fan of. But the same thing. They call the Milky Way the White Road, and it's the path that the gods take to be reborn. The maize god, he's reborn out of the same spot that in the Native American tradition is the portal that souls go into.
Wow.
And so they have these different drugs that they were using in ritual to
Mm-hmm.
have this experience before they died. And these drugs include, one of them is what I call Misihuasca, which they were using a tree here called, used to be called Acacia americana. Now
Okay.
it's been reclassified as Gleditsia triacanthos. But that acan is the same root as acacia in there.
Ah.
So it means
Okay.
acacia,
Okay.
but it contains DMT in the roots. And they were boiling this up with various substances, and they would call it black drink. Most scholars talk about black drink, and only talk about the fact that it had something in it called Ilex vomitoria, which is a Yaupon holly that grows only in these southern states: Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, I think.
Okay. Okay.
And it's the only Native American source of caffeine. It's a close cousin
Huh.
of South America's yerba mate,
Okay. Okay.
but it also contains monoamine oxidase inhibitors in it. And if you mix it
Ah.
with this tree root, which they were doing,
Mhm.
you get something that's chemically almost indistinguishable from ayahuasca. And they
Wow.
were also using Nicotiana rustica, this very strong tobacco,
Okay.
which also has monoamine oxidase inhibitors in it. And they were drinking and smoking this stuff, along with datura, black nightshade,
Wow.
hallucinogenic mushrooms. Like, they had a very complex, advanced system that they were
Pharmacopoeia.
using to get the soul out of the body and on this path, so that you could know what to do. But when the time came, when you died, so that you would know exactly what steps to make very almost Gnostic, in that you had to have,
Wow.
there were certain rituals you have to do when you meet certain obstacles on the path, because it's like a series of trials that you
Okay.
go through. Um,
Wow.
but that's so they Inner Traditions also picked that book up, but it'll probably be December 2024, or maybe a little earlier before we actually see it.
That's fascinating. That's amazing. I don't know if you're following any of that whole Skinwalker Ranch thing. If you heard anything about that
I've
out in
heard
Utah.
about it. I don't know. I have to admit, I'm sorely ignorant when it comes
Uh,
to that domain. My brother, Michael Newman, he's the source I spoke with. He has a podcast show, and I think you follow him on Twitter.
yeah, definitely.
He would be somebody to interview about that stuff. He knows way more than I do about that kind of stuff.
That's awesome. I'll definitely talk to him. I was just, when you were talking about portals and, the Southwest, that is totally what's going on. Kind of like a Skinwalker Ranch. They're seeing portals in the sky, and they have Native American carvings all around Skinwalker Ranch that are portals, and there's stone circles, and they're seeing things in the sky. So I'm just thinking there might be some type
Wow.
of correlation there. There's also a square and compass carved into one side of the rocks there, right on the ranch, which
No shit.
yeah, which is really cool.
How old is that?
They said I'm trying to think 1800s, and they attributed it to the Buffalo Soldiers, I think, that were traveling out that way.
Well, the five civilized tribes were all Freemasons. Their leaders were. Albert Pike actually helped organize them, and I think fought for them to be involved in Freemasonry. There's a great lecture and paper, but the lecture you can find on YouTube, by Robert Davis, who is the past Grand Master of Oklahoma, on Albert Pike and the five civilized tribes.
I got to get into that for sure.
And there's another a great lecture. I don't know if he's published it, but I saw him present it. Taylor Keene, who is he's a Freemason, and he's a Cherokee chief, but he was talking to us about the half moon ceremony, which is the peyote ceremony they use.
Okay.
And he was showing us how there's a lot of crossover between how we move in a lodge and where things go, orientations and things like that.
Right.
And how that appears in this half moon ceremony. But we don't know if that's just coincidental, or if Quanah Parker, who wrote that ceremony, who we don't think was a Mason, but may have been exposed to some of it through other natives. But there's a lot of crossover in the way a peyote ceremony works and the way a Masonic lodge works.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Oh man, my pleasure.
Dude, I really appreciate it, brother. It's been awesome. We got to do it again for sure. Definitely.
Anytime.
I love it, man. I'm gonna get off of this call and be like, man, I had 400 more questions.
We'll schedule another one, and write your questions down, and we'll knock them out.
That's awesome, dude. Thank you so much, man. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
I appreciate it.